back again with another feature card Buddy Fight deck profile. So I hope you guys enjoy. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and donate to the Patreon. So let's get started. Today is my Dragon World Thunder Empire budget deck. Please remember budget because technically speaking it's not budget because I could have gotten the cards that would replace the budget cards, except the fact that I couldn't get any of them at more than one copy, and I don't feel like it's worth it just to pay $2 on something that I can only get one copy of that would normally go at $4. So let's continue. So this deck's Luminize chant, if you ever want to say it, is the Lord of Thunder attacks continue until there's nothing left. Luminize sending Thunderstrike. I probably could have given that more energy, but I'm not going to. So the flag. This is obviously Dragon World, because this is a Dragon World version of the deck, not the Thunder Empire version, which has the best combo ever, which I will eventually go over when I get the chance. The Buddy, Resurrected Arc Dragon Bots, 7k power, 4k defense, critical of 2, pay a gauge to call it. During your turn, this card cannot be destroyed by any means, and at the beginning of the attack phase, if you have an item equipped, this card gets double attack. Then if you have 4 life or less, destroy a monster on your opponent's field. So pretty much, this deck is based around multi-attacking, with the double attack and all that, and if you get 4 life or less, abilities go off. I think this is the only card in the deck that actually benefits from me being at 4 life or less, besides one other card in the deck. But this thing is still useful. It destroys something on the field if you have 4 life or less, which I rarely had happen before dying. And it can't be destroyed by any means. This would be a card that you would replace if this wasn't the budget deck, but I can't buy that card that I want, so there's no point even trying. 2 copies of Replenisher Heptor. 3k power, 1k defense, critical of 1, size 0. When this card enters the field, if you have a Thunder Empire item equipped, charge a gauge. So, really good. This deck never has a gauge problem, I want to say. I've never seen it had a gauge problem, but I assume at some point it will have a gauge problem. So having all the gauge getters that you can get is really useful. And he's a size 0, which means you can call size 1, size 2s, and this thing on the field even if you don't have an item, which is Dragon World staple, which is really good. So 2 copies. 4 copies of Beyond Aspiration Chibi Panda. 4k power, 1k defense, critical of 1, size 1. When this card enters the field, you may drop a hand card. If you do, put up to 1 size 2 or greater monster with bots in its card name, or up to 1 Thunder Empire item from your deck to your hand, and shuffle your deck. If you have another Thunder Empire, if another Thunder Empire would leave the field, you may put this card from the field into the drop zone. If you do, that card remains on the field. It also has move. That is really useful because 1, it gets to literally search your deck for your buddy or your item just by being placed and discarding a hand card. Or, if a Thunder Empire besides itself would leave the field, so set spell, monster, item, you can just destroy this thing instead. And then it has move, which I keep misplaying with because I keep forgetting it has move, or I keep forgetting I have Dragon Shields in my hand when I use it. But 4 copies because he's really useful. 4 copies of the reason why this deck will probably never have a gauge problem. Thunder Preacher, Inazumack. 2k power, 2k defense, critical of 2, size 1. When a size 2 on the field attacks, gauge 2, gain 2 gauge, and this ability activates once per turn. That is really good. That's just a free gain 2 gauge. That's the equivalent to the bots and the item equipped, or just 2 bots or 2 items. Basically, this thing just gets you the gauge cost, so really good. 4 copies. 2 copies of Frontline Blacksmith Rectangle. 5k power, 2k defense, critical of 2, pay gauge to call it. When this card enters the field, you may equip a Thunder Empire item from your drop zone by paying its equip cost. It also has Penetrate. This card isn't really that good, but he helps search your drop zone and equip a Thunder Empire item. So say this thing is in your hand, your item is in your hand, and something else is in your hand. You could charge your item, call Rectangle by paying the item as the gauge cost, and then equip the item from the drop zone thanks to Rectangle. It's a really good combo, but 2 copies. 2 copies of Delta and Tetra Thunder Empire. 6k power, 4k defense, critical of 2. Put one or more Thunder Empire monsters from your field into its soul and pay a gauge. When this card attacks or is destroyed, you put the top card of your deck into your gauge. And if you have a Thunder Empire item equipped, this card gets plus 3k power, plus 3k defense, critical of 1, and penetrate. It also has move and soul guard. So this is pretty much the substitute for bots. I would suggest running 4. This is one of the cards that I couldn't get more than 1 copy of, and I just hate odd numbers in general, so I'm not going to pay, I guess, a few cents just to get 1 copy of something that I would normally put at 4, even though I could make it closer to 4. It just intensely bothers me. So 2 copies. 4 copies of Thunder Emperor's Chum, Saint Holy Sword Dragon. 6k power, 4k defense, critical of 2. If you have a monster with bots in its card name on the field, the size of this card is reduced by 1, so it becomes a size 1. And when a bot's on your field and attacks, deal 1 damage to your opponent. That's really good because that just means it's a guaranteed 1 damage, which means that they're at 1 life. No matter how much defensive spells they have in their hand, they are dying to that just because Batzz is attacking. That's really good. 4 copies, amazing card. 4 copies of our buddy, obviously, and then 1 copy of a promo that I pulled in a pack once, and I for some reason keep running him in all my Thunder Empire decks. 100 Dragon Overseer of Mercenary Band, Anthem the Dual Sword. 10k power, 5k defense, critical of 2, size 3, pay 2 gauge to call it. This card cannot attack the left or right, and it cannot be destroyed by opponent's spell effects. And when this card attacks, if you have an item equipped, destroy a monster on the opponent's left or right. It also has double attack. I have no idea why I still run this. It just happens to appear constantly, and it's the most, I guess, quote-unquote, necessary, not necessary, convenient card I have, so 1 copy. 1 copy of Batzz again, another card that I would put at 4, but I couldn't find any, so no point. Pay gauge, counter, stand a Batzz on your field. That's really good, just get another attack. With Chibi, that's a total of 3 damage, because Batzz automatically gains double attack if you have an item equipped. So, free 3 damage just by attacking, so that's really good. 1 copy. 2 copies of a Distinguished Replenisher. You may cast this card if you have a Thunder Empire monster on your field. Put the top 3 cards of your deck into your gauge and gain a life. That is really useful. It just gives you a free life and charges you 3 gauge. This is probably another reason why this deck will never have a gauge problem. Because half of the cards in your deck just give you more than, they give you gauge, which is really useful. So 2 copies. 2 copies of the only other card in this deck that actually revolves around you being at less than 4 life points, but it has a specific life point that you want to be at. Primeval Dragon Shield. You may only cast this card if you're being attacked, whether you have a center or not, that doesn't matter. Counter, nullify the attack, and then if your life is 1, draw a card. So let me make this clear. Your life has to be 1 to use this. Well, it doesn't have to be 1 to use it, but it has to be 1 for you to use the draw effect. Which at this point, your opponent might as well just cast an impact and murder you with it. Not that useful, but it's a substitute for the Arc Dragon Shield, so 2 copies. 2 copies of Blue Dragon Shield. You may only cast this card during attack on the opponent's turn, and if you have no monsters in the center. Counter, nullify the attack and gain a gauge. More cards that give you gauge. At this point, I'd be surprised if this deck ever did not have a gauge problem. So, 2 copies. 4 copies of Green Dragon Shield. You may only cast this card during an attack on the opponent's turn and you have no monsters in your center. Counter, nullify the attack and gain a life. Pretty much the counter to Batzz, but at this point, well, with all the cards they've added into Buddy Fight, despite the fact Buddy Fight's dying, their impact's going to essentially one-shot anyone at any number of life points, but mainly 5. So, kind of keeping your life points above 5 is what you kind of want to do. Or when your life points are 4, that's a common one. You might as well just keep them above 5, even though you can't use your abilities. 4 copies of Thunder X Brave Attack. My favorite card that I accidentally killed the Continental World deck with, completely forgetting that of its own effect. You may only cast this card during attack on the opponent's turn, and if you do not have a monster in the center and you have a Thunder Empire on your field, pay a gauge and a life. Counter, nullify the attack and deal a damage to the opponent. Very good card. It's basically a Dragon Shield. You do have to take damage to use it, but at the same time, it's essentially a kamikaze card. You have to be at 2 life at the very least to use it, but if your opponent's at 1 life, they're screwed. That's all I have to say. My favorite card to bullshit people with. Please ignore that. So 4 copies. 4 copies of Dragonification. I would have gotten Dragonificator Gao and then the Overthrow bots, but once more, those are expensive. So 6k power, 2 crit item, pay 2 gauge to equip it. This card on the field cannot be destroyed by card effects and counteract Entrusted Dragon powers. You may equip this card from your hand without paying its equip cost. If your cards attack 3 or more times during this turn, you may only use Entrusted Dragon powers once per turn. That ability is always going to go off most of the time, because this deck can easily get 3 attacks in a turn, which means you're just going to get a free item equip. This is normally a card that you use to push with, just to get the final move out, so 4 copies. 4 copies of Arc Dragon Sword. 6k power, 2 critical, pay a gauge to equip. This card on your field cannot be destroyed by opponent's card effects, so once it gets here, your opponent's not getting rid of it that easily. And all Thunder Empire monsters on your field get plus 2k power, making Batzz a 9k, depending on which Saint Holy Sword you pick, it becomes an 8k or a 6k. So really good. Boost up your powers, make them easier to hit over high numbers, and multi-attack. So 4 copies. And finally, the impact that replaces the actual impact. 4 copies of Thunder Sword X Tempest Blade. So, you melee costs this card if your opponent has 4 life or less, and your cards have attacked 2 or more times during this turn. This deck is going to easily push that out. I'd be surprised if it didn't, and Link Attack only counts as 1 if you don't know that. Pay 4 gauge to cast it, deal 4 damage. If this deck ever got less than 4 attacks, I would honestly be surprised, because, well, less than 3 attacks, because this deck can multi-attack like hell. So, that was the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and donate to the Patreon. And I'll see you all in the next one. Don't forget to raise your flag.